Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Tonight's show is the next installment in this incredible series by our good friend, Rico. And as ever, please do let us know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. It really does help build the channel and our community further. And why not hashtag TeamFEAR and DMT's Cryptid crew. And so, with that aside, let's get into tonight's story, entitled Ghost Soldier, Vengaza. Let's get straight into that. Prologue. Some do what others can't, or won't. Part 1. Dark Skills. In the months since Lance's mission in Iraq, he had honed his skills and learned to control his powers, but this came at a cost as he would always be dependent upon special drug treatments. Maggie worked hard to keep her blood disorder in check, but was now suffering from more headaches and occasional nightmares about the vampire who killed her parents and mugged her. The political mess was growing to unheard of lengths in Venezuela, and the human suffering was rampant. People were dumpster diving and eating roadkill to avoid starvation. Professionals such as doctors and lawyers had fallen into prostitution just to exist. The one thing that was recurrent was the dark Cuban operatives controlling the purse strings. But rumour was that an even more sinister cartel were the puppet masters. Lots of exsanguinated corpses were being found among the homeless and rural populations. Law enforcement and government officials either didn't care or were being paid to turn a blind eye. Lance and Maggie were summoned to a special access program only meets them. Sitting at the conference table, head was the mysterious CIA operative Ray with 4 other men seated on either side. These men had the obvious look of special operators, the very seasoned kind with the scars to prove it. Ray stood and welcomed Lance and Maggie. "Welcome. Please sit down." Lance paused and said, "By the way, before we get started, Ray, do you have a last name?" Ray smiled and again said, "Just Ray will do nicely." Lance shook his head. Under his breath he mumbled, "Fucking CIA." And a couple of men at the table smiled. These guys at the table were obviously Delta Force or SEAL Special Operators, and with specific skill sets. And for security purposes, they would be known only by their call signs. Schizo, a somewhat sociopathic assassin and with the gift of persuasion. Sledge, an explosives and exotic weapons expert. Gonzo, an expert cyber hacker and computer engineer, along with their commander, Ronin, a martial arts expert and Delta Force operator. And Ray began. "We have reason to believe the secret group that the corrupt Venezuelan government is working with is in reality a group of vampires, possibly headed up by the one who marked Maggie. She is Venezuelan. She speaks the language and knows the customs. She will be the bait to draw him out." Lance shot to his feet, objecting. "No fucking way," he said. Maggie stood and said, "Oh, calm down. This was my idea and we will have a drone and a satellite tracking our movements. I want this, Lance. It's my chance for revenge. It's justice for my parents." And as he fell into his seat, he said, "How is all this going to happen since Venezuela ain't the most open country these days?" Ray stood and began showing a map with a plan involving the help of the Resistencia, Libra, and a covert Colombian naval vessel. Maggie will be a doctor and Lance her medical assistant. Schizo and Gonzo will be contractors there to analyze and update internet and security. 2 members of Libra are posing as engineers inspecting bridges and making recommendations for repairs. Sledge and Ronin will be on board the Colombian Navy vessel just outside of Venezuelan waters. They will have real-time tracking from a stealth drone high over the border. This Colombian ship will carry one of our stealth helicopters for ingress and extraction, and the Resistencia Libra will smuggle in weapons from Colombia. Part 2. Mala Sangre, Bad Blood. Maggie and Lance opened shop in the Clínica de Salud Pública, Maracaibo Health Clinic, offering routine health exams, vaccines and testing. On Thursday of their first week, a woman brought her 13-year-old daughter, Angelina, and she was pale and anemic, and with a strange pigmentation to her skin. Lance immediately alerted to her presence, and he quickly finished with his routine vitals exam of an elderly woman and came into the exam room. When he saw the young girl, he sensed what was wrong with her. She also sensed something when he entered the room and tensed up. Lance whispered in Maggie's ear, "They're feeding on her." "Okay," she nodded. "She's nervous with you here. Go back to work while I get blood samples." And Maggie began to ask the young girl's mother how long she had been this way and where they lived. They were from a small village near where Maggie was born. The woman's name was Elena, and she began to explain. "We live on a small farm in the hills above the lake. About a month ago, I noticed this sore on the back of Angelina's neck, under her hair. It gets better for a while and then it gets worse again, but it never fully heals." And Maggie nervously pulled up Angelina's hair and saw something that made her blood run cold. There was an inch-long crescent-shaped scar, very much like the one on Maggie's cheek. She went on to ask, "Signora, are there any more people with this condition?" "Si," she responded. "There are a few more girls like this. One recently died after suffering for many months. Our village doctor could not help her, so I travelled on the bus since 6 a.m. to bring her here." "Okay," Maggie responded. "We need to get her to a hospital and run some more tests." While Maggie and Lance were busy at the clinic, Gonzo and Schizo were in the basement of the Ciudad Municipal building, diagnosing the condition of the internet. Gonzo's family were from Mexico, so he could speak and read Spanish fluently. He had Schizo watch his back while he began assessing and downloading government and military files. He occasionally saw references in private memos about the enfermedad de la sangre, or blood disease. He also found references to payments in gold to certain government and military officials. He began trying to track the origin of the payments, but he could only find references to the prince. That evening, they met with Lance and Maggie by the Hotel International swimming pool. Lance had become quite paranoid that they were being surveyed. They pretended to meet each other for the first time and ordered food and drinks by the pool. Maggie had gotten Angelina admitted to a hospital, and they exchanged intel about what they had learned. "It looks like we have to go to the village above Lake Maracaibo. We set up a small clinic there." Lance objected, saying how dangerous it would be for Maggie. She put her hand on Lance's shoulder and said, "We must stop who or whatever is doing this to these young girls." Lance shook his head and said, "Okay, but we need a plan." Gonzo sent encrypted messages to Ronin and Sledge on the ship saying that they would be in the Maracaibo village Monday morning. "We should tell our Resistencia Libre Bridge inspectors that they need to inspect the Maracaibo Bridge next week." Then Gonzo received an encrypted response from Ronin saying, "ISR will be overhead. Hilo will drop us on the nearest mountain at the border. We'll double time to the forest overlooking the village. Be there before first light Monday. We'll conceal there until dark. Resistencia Libre will hide the smuggled weapons under a bridge near the village entrance." And Maggie got on the phone getting permission to set up their clinic at the only public building in the small village. The area doctor was pleased to host them. "Okay," said Schizo. "We need to get up to the room and start studying maps and satellite photos of this village and the surrounding areas." And Maggie turned to Lance and said, "Hey, you want to go to the hospital with me to check on Angelina?" "Yeah, sure," he said. And as they left the hotel in a taxi, they were being followed by 2 men in an unmarked car. Part 3. Viento del Muerto. Death Wind. Let's get straight into that. Upon arriving in the village and setting up their clinic in a small community building, a long line had formed by noon that they had not prepared for. It was almost sundown and there were still people waiting who would have had to return the next day. Oddly, many had started to become nervous and chatter as they made their way to their homes, seemingly uneasy. But Lance's senses were triggered again. He looked outside to see a man carrying a young girl away. He ran to the man and said, "Signor, por favor, entra," and motioned for them to come inside. It was an older man named Juan, carrying his 12-year-old granddaughter, Lorena. Maggie rushed to greet them, speaking Spanish, and within a minute she knew they had another victim. She moved Lorena's hair out of the way to find the crescent-shaped sore in her hairline, not far from her left ear. "Senor Juan, how long has she had this?" "About a month ago we found it. I thought it was some sort of parasite. A doctor treated her, but she didn't get better. Then the Ramirez girl died last week. We are all scared, señorita, doctor. Some say the ancient Viento del Muerto has arrived." "What is the Viento del Muerto?" Maggie asked. "At night when the wind blows from the mountains, a screeching sound can be heard. It makes a chill go up your spine. Some say it is the wind carrying the sounds of death approaching." "Are there any other girls with this condition?" she asked. "Si, I know of 3 more." "Can you please ask their family to bring them to me tomorrow?" "Si, señorita," replied Juan, with a thankful tear in his eye. "In the meantime, we will care for Lorena here overnight and give her medicines intravenously." Juan bowed and looked at Lance and also said, "Gracias," and then turned to walk into the darkness. At around 7 a.m, Lance and Maggie arose to the sound of 4 soldiers pounding on the door. The leader scowled at Lance and began to question Maggie. She explained about the sick girls and how she was treating one. Sergeant Morales then asked in a loud voice, "And who is this man? An American spy?" "No," said Maggie. "He is my fiancé and medical assistant." Morales stared at Lance and responded, "Yeah, he looks like a soldier to me." And before Maggie could speak, Lance responded in his best Spanish, "Yes, I was a soldier, and a battlefield medic who has seen enough death for 10 lifetimes." Morales seemed to loosen his tense posture a bit and turned to look at Maggie, saying, "We will be watching you," then turned to leave with his men following. Lance whispered into Maggie's ear and said, "Oh boy, do I want to rip him a new place to sit." At that point, they heard Lorena calling out. She was sitting up and looking much better. "Where am I?" she said. And Maggie explained, and a frightened but thankful Lorena reached out to hug Lance tightly. Maggie asked Lorena if she could explain how this happened, and she shook her head and responded in broken English. "A pale-skinned man. He come into my dreams. I wake up and I feel sick." About that time, Dr. Antonio arrived and introduced himself to Lance and Maggie. He examined Lorena and said, "Yes, I have seen this condition here and in the neighboring villages. I cannot explain it." Then it was just before 9 a.m. when the sound of a horse-drawn farm wagon approached carrying 3 more girls with family members walking alongside. Maggie and Dr. Antonio examined them to discover that they all had suffered the same symptoms to varying degrees and bore the crescent-shaped sore on their necks under the hairline. After questioning all of the girls, Maggie developed a theory. She believed that the girls whose sores were more healed would most likely be the ones visited the soonest because their blood count was higher. She then asked Dr. Antonio to help with the other patients in line. Maggie turned to Lance and said, "I know how we kill these SOBs." "Hold up, Max," said Lance. "A vision without a plan? It's just a hallucination. We need a plan." "I have one," said Maggie. "With Lorena much better, she will go home, and our plan is to stake out her house and wait till these creeps show up. Part 4. Principe del Sangria. The following morning, a knock came on the door. It was Father Amos, who had helped Maggie as a child after her parents were murdered. She hugged him and introduced him to Lance. "It is so good to see you, my child. You have grown up well and become a doctor. Praise God." "So, Father," said Lance, "what do you know about all of this?" "You mean, do I know about the vampires?" he responded, and the father grew quiet and hung his head. "Yes, there are many, but their leader is called El Príncipe del Sangria, the Prince of Blood. But my people only whisper his name for fear that he will hear them and come for his blood tribute. I'm going to kill him, said Maggie. And Father Amos asked, What is it your spirit seeks, Maggie? Vengeance, Father. Vengeance and justice for my parents. Be careful, my child. The venganza del Magdalena may come at a price. And Maggie looked at the father with a stern resolve and said, For over 20 years I have dreamed of the day that I would wipe the sinister sneer off that monster's face, and I will not rest until I do it. God go with you both, said Father Amos as he made the sign of the cross and then departed. As the father exited, Lorena's mother and grandfather arrived to take her home. Lance and Maggie shared their intention to survey the house. They were noticeably pleased, and Juan drew a sketch of the property, with ideal places for concealment. Maggie went to Dr. Antonio and said, Pardon me, doctor, but would you mind staying here tonight to watch the girls in treatment? I must make a house call, and should I not return, please accept all of our equipment and supplies with my gratitude. Of course, said the doctor. Buenas suerte. 48 hours earlier, the chopper had dropped Ronan and Sledge on a mountain pass where they would make their way down to their predetermined location. Ronan commenced equipment and comm checks. Clipper, this is Ridge Runner. Radio checks. Ridge Runner, this is Clipper. Overwatch in place. ISI picture clear. Recommend proceed. Down the mountain, they trekked as fast as possible, with rucksacks and equipment. The stakeout of Lorena's home would be accomplished with Lance and Maggie hiding in the barn, while Schizo and Gonzo watched the house from the ditch by the road. How do we get them here without the military getting suspicious? Said Lance. Simple, said Maggie. They're going to say that they have a stomach bug from the water and come to the clinic for treatment. It will sneak out during the night where the Resistencia Libre will meet them with our weapons. The 2 bridge inspectors will guard the small bridge over the river to the main road. Lance smiled and said, I knew there was a reason I fell for you. The 2 Libra members met Gonzo and Schizo with automatic weapons and night heat vision scopes for surveillance. The home sat at the base of a mountain in a small valley, and as Gonzo and Schizo took up their positions, an encrypted message came from Ronan. In place, ISR shows 2 faint heat signatures moving rapidly down the mountain from a cave entrance. We'll mark GPS coordinates and transmit, moving to shadow targets. And as 2 vamp heat signatures approached Lorena's house at a dizzying speed, Schizo alerted the local police approaching. The comms crackled with Gonzo saying, we got company. Military police approaching. And Ronan and Sledge were now about 500 or 600 meters below the cave entrance, and with no hope of catching up with the 2 targets when ISR alerted that they were actually 3 targets. Ronan broke radio silence with the following message. Be advised, there are 3 targets. I say, 3 tangos. And it was then that somebody got out of the police vehicle with binoculars and started glassing the farm. Shit, said Schizo. We need to push forward towards the house. A gunshot rang out with Gonzo and Com saying, Contact, 4 tangos. Lance looked at Maggie and said, Damn, we have no weapons. Lance was armed only with his serrated sword that he had managed to smuggle into the country, concealed in their equipment. At that moment, Lance heard his grandfather's voice in his ear. Go, soldier. The Jumlin are behind the house. Lance's head perked up and he began smelling. They're here, he said. He and Maggie rushed out of the barn door towards the back of the house. Lance ran ahead as Maggie fell behind when a loud crash was heard, followed by a scream. The vamps had crashed through the back door and grabbed Lorena and were attacking the rest of the family. Lance burst through the back door already, starting to transform. He tackled the vamp carrying Lorena, and they rolled across the floor, while he fought with this one. The other one made off with Lorena. Just as he ran his sword into the heart of the vamp, he heard a scream outside. It was Maggie. The other vamp had her. Part 5. Into Darkness. Let's get straight into that. As if things couldn't get any worse, there was an explosion outside, followed by automatic gunfire and bullets riddling the house. Lance quickly moved to push the family members to the floor. He looked over to see that a bullet had struck Juan, and he lay bleeding out. Lance scampered out the back door, becoming more beast with each step, and sneaked up on the cop with a machine gun and broke his neck. There was now only one left, after Schizo and Gonzo had killed the other two. And as the remaining cop fired his weapon, a hail of bullets struck him, and it was over. Lance quickly explained the situation and took Gonzo's sidearm and ran for the mountain in pursuit of Maggie and Lorena. But before Schizo and Gonzo could follow, more bad news came across comms. Ridge Runner Actual, this is Clipper. Overwatch paints 5 military vehicles approaching from the east. An unknown voice came over their comms with a thick Latin accent. Hello, Resistencia Libre talking. We can delay them a little bit for you, and then we must run away. As the convoy rounded a curve, approaching a small river bridge, it was an old truck parked in the middle. 4 men in an old jeep drove forward, slowly to check it out, and it exploded into a fireball, killing 2 and mortally wounding the other 2. It bought some time for the team, as the soldiers had to put out the flames and carry away the casualties before they could clear the bridge. Ronin and Sledge watched helplessly as 2 heat signatures about 300 meters to the south ran rapidly back towards the cave, and with no hope of catching them. Oddly, it looked like they were carrying something else, giving off heat. And then suddenly another heat signature appeared about 150 feet away, running in their direction. They moved to intercept and screamed, Halt! Hands in the air! Well, it was Lance, and he shouted, It's me! They got the girls! They doubled time to the cave but couldn't keep up with Lance. Lance was already in the cave when Ronin and Sledge were their way down to join him. Lance turned to Ronin and said, I must warn you, I have a bit of Jekyll and Hyde condition. Ronin smiled and replied, Well, I've been accused of being quite a brute myself. And Lance nodded and pushed forward, now smelling the telltale odours of death and vampires, as his eyes began to see through the darkness. Ronin adjusted his NOGs and suddenly whispered, I got a bad feeling about this. The Sledge readied a 20k candlelight beam and a high-pitched sonic weapon. They abruptly stopped to see a tall, gaunt figure standing on the ledge with 5 others behind him. A raspy, deep voice spoke. I am Eustatius, one of the original Stigoi of Romania. Anatolius, who you met in Iraq, is the one who turned me. He is the Maestro Almotora, or master of many. And Lance replied, Well, too bad he ain't here, so I could kill him too. The Sergeant Morales and his men had cleared the bridge and were barreling towards Gonzo and Schizo at the farm. It was a sharp curve leading to a fork in the road about 100 meters away. Schizo and Gonzo collected the weapons and ammo and then jumped into the police vehicle and drove it down to the fork. Well, we're going to block this road. It'll slow them up and buy us some time. Now, Gonzo, you run for the extraction point. No way, said Gonzo. You can't fight them off alone. I'm staying. Okay, let's fall back to the ditch in front of the farm. We can pick off a few of them from there and give the family time to run. A large truck carrying troops rounded the corner, using its heavy bumper to push the vehicle out of its way. Gonzo and Schizo opened fire on the windshield, killing the driver and causing the truck to roll over on the side of the road. The remaining 3 vehicles stopped single file behind the big truck. Its occupants poured out and began firing on them. And despite bullets raining down all around them, Gonzo and Schizo managed to pick off a few troops here and there. But then the telltale sound of a mortar was heard as Schizo shouted, Incoming! And a mortar round exploded about 50 meters behind them. Part 6. Straight into Hell. When the cave, screeching sound started emanating from all around, Ronin turned to Sledge and said, Okay, it's your show. He turned on the Hell weapon, or high-energy luminous lantern, and shined into the eyes of several vamps rapidly approaching, instantly blinding them, while Ronan took the sonic weapon and told Lance to put a plug in his ears. It let out a sound like a million birds chirping all at once. Small loose rocks even began to fall from the cave walls. The vamps that weren't blinded were now rolling across the cave floor trying to cover their ears. Lance launched himself forward and began beheading several vamps with his serrated sword blade. Suddenly, Lance screamed out, "Cut the sonic weapon!" He removed his earplugs and then listened and smelled. Eustasius and his henchmen were gone. And after a few steps, Lance stopped and held up his hand. He heard his grandfather's voice in his ears. "Maggie and the girls are okay. They are down the right fork and with 2 Jomlin guarding them." Lance and Ronan made their way a little further into the cave with Sledge close behind. Lance whispered over his shoulder, "Okay, don't use that sonic weapon unless everything turns to shit. I need my ears, but you can stay ready with that spotlight. I hear humans breathing and the sound of a child softly sobbing down the right fork. Now Sledge, I need you to push that way and get the girls. But be very quiet and control your breathing. Now Ronan, follow me. We got a date with Eustasius and his monkeys." And went their separate ways. Lance halted and said, "I smell Eustasius and some other vamps." Lance pulled his serrated sword from its sheath on his back and looked to see that Ronan had pulled a katana from the sheath on his back, laying his rifle down. And he looked at Ronan and whispered, "So, are we doing this old school?" "Hooah!" whispered Ronan. And as they crept towards the end of the tunnel, Lance's grandfather appeared in front of him. "Listen to me, ghost soldier. These are very old Jomlin with powerful bad medicine. Let the spirit wind flow through you." And after pushing on another 50 or 60 feet, there stood Eustasius and his 5 thugs in front of what looked like a carved-out cave dwelling with furnishing and dim lighting. But the stench of death hung in the air as partially rotting corpses of all sizes lay scattered. Eustasius pointed a long, sharp fingernail at Lance, and an evil snarl said, "One of you will die, and one of you will be dinner." Then 3 of his henchmen rushed towards Lance and the other 2 ran for Ronan. Lance completed his transformation in an instant as his brow line grew thick and his teeth longer. Sharp, strong nails jutted from his fingers as the first vamp approached with a large battle axe. Lance jumped and tumbled over him, swinging the sword down and splitting the vamp's head in 2 down to the nose. He now faced 2, one with a long saber and wearing a glove studded with spikes protruding from the fist. The other swung a long chain with a spiked ball on the end. Ronan fought with the same ferocity as Lance, as one vamp advanced on him with a spear and the other held a small tomahawk-like axe in one hand and a mace with the 2 spiked balls in the other. The one with the spear thrust a long blade at him, and he deflected it, but this was no normal spear. The other end had a grapefruit-sized steel ball on the end that he quickly swung over his head, narrowly missing Ronan, and busted up small pieces of rock from the cave floor when it struck the ground. The other swung his tomahawk at Ronan, but he blocked it. However, he swung the spiked balls with great force and struck Ronan's ballistic vest, knocking him to the ground. He rolled backwards to his feet with a speed that surprised the vamps, as the one with the spear thrust at him again. But this time Ronan anticipated the move and tumbled forwards, running his katana through the vamp's heart before he could strike with a steel ball. Lance dodged and thrust from the saber and sliced off the left arm of the vamp at the elbow, causing him to let out an ear-piercing shriek. But before he could turn about, the spiked ball struck him in the middle of his back, sending him to the ground. He quickly spun over, feeling the sharp pain just in time to block another hit from the spiked ball with his sword. He wrapped the chain around the blade, pulling the vamp close with all of his might, and used both legs to execute a double kick, knocking the creature back onto the cave floor several feet away. Lance was now in a rage, and jumped to his feet, chain in hand, to face the vamp whose arm he had sliced. He gripped the chain and swung it taut, delivering a deft blow and smashing the vamp's skull flat with a spike ball. He turned to face the other vamp and slung the chain into the wall. He sheathed his sword and motioned with both hands for the vamp to come on. And there was now a look of concern on Eustachius' face, as 3 of his henchmen lay dead.
"Kill them now!"
he screamed with a primal rage. Ronan now faced off with the other vamp holding a tomahawk and mace. He slowly put his katana back into its sheath and stood there motionless. He stuck his hand out and motioned with his index finger for the vamp to come on. An evil grin came across the vamp's face as he dropped his weapons and charged Ronan with sharp fingernails ready to slice. At that instant, Ronan pulled his .45 and put a bullet in each of the creature's eye sockets. He turned and pointed his weapon at Eustachius and said, "Don't move!" Lance and the final henchman fought mano a mano, scratching each other with their long, sharp fingernails. Part 7. The Bitter Taste of Blood. Let's get straight into that. As Sledge crept down the right fork towards Maggie and Lorena, he couldn't see anything through the NOGs. He heard a sudden rushing sound, and as he turned, he was hit broadside and knocked to the cave floor with a hard thud, banging his head, and momentarily knocking the breath out of him. Clutching the powerful hell light, he quickly twisted over on his back and hit the switch, blinding his attacker and causing the other to flee for cover. He pulled his pistol and double-tapped the vamp in the throat while it covered its eyes, and the other vamp was nowhere to be seen, as Sledge shakily illuminated the cavern. He tried to listen for the slightest sound, but there was nothing. Then, suddenly a female voice called out, "He's above you, behind a rock ledge." Sledge turned, falling on his back, and unleashed the sonic weapon. The vamp let out an audible high-pitched screech as it fell on top of Sledge. He wriggled out from under the creature and put a bullet into its ear. Then he untied a grateful Maggie and Lorena, and they headed back to join up with Lance and Ronan. Back at the farm, mortar rounds were now landing closer to Gonzo and Schizo, and with each explosion, the Venezuelan soldiers inched closer. Schizo looked at Gonzo and shook his head when the comms suddenly crackled. "Ridge Runner, actual. This is Clipper. Suggest you take cover. Hellfire missiles inbound. Danger close." And they rolled into a ball covering their heads in a ditch, and only seconds later there were 2 explosions, followed by an eerie silence, except for the sounds of a few men crying out. And as Sledge awkwardly stumbled along with a possible concussion and Maggie's help, they saw Ronan holding a pistol on Eustachius, with the red laser sight painting a dot over his heart. Lance had now gone full-on monster, and held down that last vamp and slashed his throat until he almost decapitated his head. He heard Maggie's voice calmly say, "Lance, he's dead. Calm yourself." And he turned to face them, and Ronan got a good look at the Mr. Hyde that Lance spoke of. Everyone turned their attention to Eustachius, who stood motionless now with the threat of a bullet, spotlight, and sonic weapon. And he said nervously,
"Listen to me. I can make you all richer than the fools in the government that I bought off."
And Maggie stepped forward to where Lance stood, and she said, "You filthy SOB. There is no amount of money that you can pay me to make up for what you did to my wonderful parents. And how dare you think you could mark me to someday be one of your blood concubines?" But he relaxed his tense posture and bit and said,
"So, what will it be then? I have lived for almost a millennium. It cannot end this way."
Lance quickly pulled his pistol and blew out both of Eustachius's kneecaps and said, "Wanna bet?" Eustachius crumpled to the floor with a loud shriek as Lance and Maggie drew near. He began to beg for his life, and Maggie coldly said, "I hid under my bed and listened to my mother beg you for her life, but you showed no mercy. Neither will I." Lance handed Maggie his pistol, and she looked down at Eustachius and said, "Before you go to hell, I want this scar you put on my face to be the last thing you see." And he covered his face and eyes, and then Lance stepped firmly on one of his knees, causing his eyes to open wide. And as he gasped, Maggie squeezed off one round to his heart, and then waited a moment, watching him choke on dark blood flowing from his mouth. She then put a final round into his forehead, and it was done. Venganza del Magalena was complete. Part 8. The hunt begins. And they made their way out of the cave, helping Sledge, who seemed unstable from his head injury. At the mouth of the cave, the comms came alive with Schizo saying, "Any Ridge Runner element, we are 3 clicks from extraction point." And Ronin responded, "Roger, secure LZ en route." But the LZ was about 5 clicks to the north on a small plateau. Ronin retrieved the marker beacon from Sledge's bag and sat it in the mouth of the cave. He keyed comms and said, "Bow cry, this is Ridge Runner, actual. Loose arrows." And that was the signal for 2 high-explosive cruise missiles to launch and seal this cave permanently. About 3 seconds later, a voice came over comms saying, "Bow cry, roger. Arrows loosed." They now had about 5 minutes to get clear, and as they jogged along, 2 loud explosions emanated from behind them, and they turned to see a pillar of fire rising. That lasted all now but returned to normal and turned to shake Ronin's hand.
"Thank you," he said. "I'll go into battle with you any time."
Same here, Ronin. By the way, I'm Captain Harrison Tate, but please, you can call me Harry. We're forming a cryptid hunting unit at Fort Campbell, and I would love to have you."
I'm flattered," said Lance. "But I don't know if I'm cut out to hunt Sasquatch or the big bad wolf. But if you get any vampires, well, just give me a call."
"Well, roger that," said Harry. "We best head to the LZ." But Maggie and Lance, they already had a different plan. They were going to the next village over where Maggie was from. She needed to visit her parents' grave with Lance and Father Amos. "But how will you get home?" said Harry. "I called Ray via sat phone. He's made arrangements to get us to Columbia and then home." And they wished each other well, and then Harry and the operators headed out. Maggie and Lance met Father Amos at the cemetery. Maggie cleaned off the headstone and the carving became readable.
"What does it say?"
said Lance. Maggie sobbed as she translated. "Forgiveness is the fragrance that the violet sheds on the hill that has crushed it." It was my mother's favorite line. Lance held Maggie as she cried. "I have dreamed about this day since I was 10, and I still feel a huge emptiness, but I am now more determined than ever to do more."
"We'll do it together," said Lance, "because I will not rest until I kill Anatolius."
Epilogue. Wolves are born predators. Sheep are born prey. Only humans have a choice. Wow. Wow. Suddenly another one. Wow. Just as ever, absolutely thrilling, nail-biting and gripping storyline from the incredible mind of Rico. Mighty thank you to you, Rico, for your dedication, your support and friendship. Really is appreciated. And of course, as ever, I hope you enjoyed this rendition. Well, guys and girls, as ever, you know the drill. Please do let us know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. It really does help build the channel and our community further. And why not hashtag TeamFEAR and DMT's Cryptid Crew. Now if you think you can pen a story packing that much punch, then please do get in touch with me at the contact email which is as on screen. Contact thedeadone@gmail.com, and I really look forward to hearing from you. I hope you're all well and happy, guys and girls, and your family and friends alike. And I hope you all have lots planned for the spooky season with family and friends. Why not let us know what you're all up to down below in the comments, and I will do my best to rustle up something extra special for Halloween celebrations. As ever, big thank you and much love to each and every one of you. But above all, remember, be safe, not sorry.